Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool watch for you from a brand new brand to the channel, Vario. And I have to say, they kind of came a little bit out of nowhere. They're a Singapore-based micro brand, and they actually, this is kind of their first watch model. They've had a couple of different movement options and whatnot. This is in particular the hand wind model, and they actually do produce a bunch of different types of straps as well. This particular model I decided to put on a mesh to really kind of accentuate the vintage vibe of it. So bear with me on that. If you're not a fan of when reviewers don't have watches on their kind of factory strap. If this did have a factory mesh option, I definitely would have kind of chose to review it on that. But this did have quite a few different options, but I thought that this really, I don't know, it just kind of popped. And the nice thing is that it's a very affordable watch, and the mesh itself, of course, is very affordable. I was actually able to get it on Amazon for like 11 bucks. So we'll talk a little bit about more on that when we get into the details of the video. But just to talk about the type of watch this is, of course, it is a dress watch. Now, some key common characteristics in design language: when you're looking for a dress watch, you're going to want something pretty much that has that clean, classic, minimalist design that is, of course, sensibly sized. Normally that kind of retro 50s, 60s, mid-century design aesthetic is something that's going to carry over into many different dress watches of today and yesterday. So this particular model is the Eclipse hand wound. So this does have a hand winding mechanical movement, which is great. And the retail price on these is $328 direct from Vario. So you can get a mechanical hand wound dress watch at a really great, really great specs, which we'll cover a little bit more. Of course, you saw them come across the screen there earlier in the video, but I gotta say, I think that this one has a lot of value there. It's, for less than $350. So a really cool look, really cool execution, but let's go ahead and get this in hand. All right. So a little bit about this particular model. It, of course, is in that wonderful emerald green. This actually has a really, I think, well-sized 38mm diameter case. There was a time in my life when I thought 38mm was way too small for my 7¼ wrist, but really it's one of those things where it depends on the kind of dial to bezel ratio, and then of course there's also the lug length. So it's one of those things where it's not just a purely numbers game. You can't just rule out a size because whatever it is, because there's just so many different nuances that affect the way a watch wears. So this is actually, of course, 38mm, as I mentioned, which I think is just about perfect for this style of watch. And then the overall height from the case back to the top of that crystal there is going to be 11mm, but the case itself is actually just going to measure at 8mm. So really nice and thin there. It's one of those things, of course, you're going to be looking at the overall height, but the profile of the watch itself is very thin, thanks in part to, of course, the 8mm thin height on it, which is really nice. So this is 45mm lug to lug, which I think is about right for this type of watch. And then of course it is 316L stainless steel. This has a 3mm thick sapphire crystal that is double domed with inner AR coating. So double domed just means that it's domed on the top and it's also domed underneath on the inside. So there's going to be much less, if any, type of, as you can see, it's still all very clear, all very legible. You're not going to see any distortion or anything like that. Normally you would see distortion if the top, let's say, was, was domed, then underneath was flat. So when you have that, it's going to create, a magnification effect, of course, but as well as some distortion at angle. Here, it's definitely nice and very legible at many different angles. So the crown here, as you can see, is signed, and it is not a screw down because, you know, it's a mechanical watch, so you're not going to want to put too much wear and tear on there. The movement that's inside here is actually the Miyota 6T33, and it is a hand wound mechanical movement. It actually has a nice 4 hertz beat, which would be 8 ticks per second. It has a 40-hour power reserve and is non-hacking, which is kind of the only drawback here. Once you kind of get used to hacking, it's just one of those things, hacking movements, it's hard to go back from it. But, you know, honestly, there's so many watches that are out there, especially this type of watch and just dress watches in general, where it's not even that important to necessarily have a second hand. So if you're not hacking, you know, getting a perfect time hack on it, it's not a deal breaker for me in this type of application. So that's something to be said. Now, as far as the case back goes, they have a really interesting case back. As you can see, it's just some pretty simple etchings there. You can see that it was designed in Singapore, stainless steel, sapphire, you know, 5 atmospheres mechanical. So not super descriptive there, but, you know, it does the job. And of course, it's going to be on top of your wrist anyway. So even if you weren't a huge fan of a lone wolf there on a mountaintop, it's not going to be something that you're going to have to look at, because you'll be looking at this beautiful sunray dial. Now, it doesn't have any type of loom or anything like that. So as you can see, it's just printed indices in the kind of basic stick configuration, and then it does have, of course, these beautiful polished hands there, and then the raised logo, and it's a really nice effect, and I gotta say, just really nicely executed. And it's one of those things that doesn't always have to be this nice, you know, because many of these kind of sunray dials come off looking a lot like paper. So it's nice when a company that kind of comes out of nowhere to really make sure that they have the more of the metallic look there, and you know, you don't really lose that. You can really see that they're underneath the coating, there's just machining lines, and it is really nice the way it plays with the light. It gives you almost 2 dials for the price of 1, because you have it when it's, you know, the dark kind of spectrum, and then you have the bright spectrum there, and it plays with the light. And I think if it was just lit up all the time, it would definitely be, you know, of course in the studio lights I can kind of try to force it to be super green and lit up, but I think it'd be a bit overpowering if it didn't have that sunray effect. And then of course it does help it be also versatile, because, you know, black face, muted tone is definitely something that's going to be very versatile, and you kind of have that in certain lights, or, you know, a lack thereof light. So this, of course, also is time only. There's not a date or anything like that on it, but it is, you know, kind of, it does tie into that minimalist design that you see there. So it does have 20mm lugs, which is nice, that they didn't try to do like 19 or 18 or anything like that. I think 20 is the right size, and it does make it very versatile. Of course, I was able to put it on this great mesh bracelet for super cheap on Amazon, the Ritchie stainless steel mesh, for 11 bucks. So you can't really beat that. But one thing I did want to talk about a little bit and show you was some of their straps. Unfortunately, the straps they sent me weren't really huge matches for the watch itself. It's the charcoal tweed strap, and you know, for all intensive purposes, these are really nice straps. I think the one design aspect I would change is I would probably make the keepers leather. You know, in this case, maybe a black leather, because I feel like they do come off as being a bit big and a bit overly fuzzy. So scale wise, it's just not, you know, a perfect fit for me. But as far as execution goes, these things are actually pretty nice. So as you can see, nice quality there. This is the one that came on the watch, and then they actually also sent this one to kind of take a look at, which I thought was a really interesting color, as well. And you know, there's definitely parts of my wardrobe where this is something that is, it's the nice thing about tweed is it's kind of in between dressy and casual. So it's one of those things that we can really dress down a watch. Yeah, see, I don't think color wise it's a great pair, but I think texture wise it's definitely very nice. So I did want to make sure to get a look at those, because you find something as interesting as a, you know, a tweed strap, you kind of want to yeah, get the word out about it, because this is a pretty cool option. Again, you know, here I think it would have been nicer to have maybe dark brown keepers there made out of leather versus having it in tweed, because it just scale wise it just comes off as being, you know, a little less refined and just, you know, a little bit too kind of fuzzy and loose looking. Another strap they sent me was one of their graphic NATOs, which was really cool. Again, unfortunately, I didn't feel like the colorway really went really great with this particular model, but I mean, it's a green sunburst style watch, so it's already going to be very particular as far as the types of straps you're going to have it on. But I thought this was actually really nice. One of the little details that I liked is that they actually did sign the lower keeper here with the Vario, which was nice, and you know, pretty standard construction and everything. Nothing to write home about. Of course, I've reviewed tons of NATOs on this channel, some really high-end ones. This is, you know, I'd say middle of the pack, but it is really nice that it does have those different options. They have some really cool designs and patterns printed on, so definitely, again, is something that it really suits that kind of dressing up and dressing down versatility that you find with this piece. So with that said, let's go ahead and get this on the wrist. Okay, now as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, that 38mm wears really, really well. Of course, it might even appear a little bit small when I have more of my arm in the frame there, but when I get up close for, you know, a wristwatch check, it's gonna appear physically a bit bigger because of the distortion in the lens, and also just when you're looking closer at the dial, it's just going to come off as looking a bit bigger. But you know, I think this is the right size for a watch like this. This is something that can easily slide under a cuff. But the nice thing is, I think once you add that mesh, it does make it somehow a little bit dressier and a little bit sportier. I'd say sportier because, of course, a steel bracelet's always going to make a watch feel a little bit more sporty. But because of the polished nature of the mesh and the really kind of tie into that mid-century look, I think that's what kind of dresses it up more, so that it just looks a bit more luxurious. You know, and the nice thing is, for the price, I mean, you know, you add $11 to the purchase price of this, which is already, you know, under 330 bucks. I mean, this is a crazy combo for under 350, and it's something that you're not going to see just on any person's wrist. This is a little bit more of a connoisseur's watch, but it does have, I think, the really nice minimalist design that's going to tie into many of the fashion watches that are very popular today. And again, I'm not huge into fashion watches, so I think it's actually really cool when you find a brand like this that can really offer you something a little bit more for your money, because you are going to get that hand-wind mechanical movement. You're going to get these really cool and interesting strap options you can go with. But I mean, you're going to get sapphire, you know, which is nice. So again, this is just something that I think they really did a great job. As you can see on the wrist, it wears really well. Nice profile. I mean, that domed sapphire just about disappears. The thing is just so nice. And then, of course, there's going to be a little bit more reflection from the studio lights here than you would see in real life. But it does give you kind of an idea of how this is going to look on your wrist. If you do have a, you know, 7¼ inch wrist, if you have a smaller wrist, I think this is still going to wear really well. As you can see, those lugs do swoop down very nicely. And if you have a larger wrist, I think this watch, because of the kind of all dial nature, I think it could still work for, you know, maybe a 7½ inch wrist, or, you know, maybe anything kind of just under an 8 inch. And maybe it could work if it didn't have these kind of the hash marks that go all the way around. Maybe if they were just bullet points instead of hash marks, it would open up the dial a little bit more, but I do feel like that is kind of a design feature that does shrink the dial a bit, because now with those indexes there, you know, it kind of makes you focus on a smaller center portion. But I think, as you can see, the way it just plays, I don't really have, I think this might even be the first green dialed watch I've reviewed on the channel. I don't really own very many green watches, so it's something that I wanted to kind of try. And, you know, for the price, you know, definitely was worth it. They have blue dial op. They have tons of different options, you know, silver dials, red dial, which I thought was really cool, as well. But I just thought the green, you know, it's kind of been a long time coming, and I really like that they didn't go too crazy with the color palette. They just did the green with the simple silver, and I think it goes really, really nice. And the green itself almost has kind of some dark teal kind of hints to it, so it almost does have a bluish tone at times, which of course, you know, I love blue dialed watches. This isn't quite a seafoam green, but it's definitely close. So let's go ahead, and although we don't have any lume on here, let's do some low light transition just so you can kind of get a look at the way that the dial plays with the light and some of the finishing under low light. Okay, so when I do this low light transition, it's something that's kind of unique to my channel, where normally I will show the lume, but because this watch doesn't have lume, one of the nice things though is when you do that low light transition, of course, it does kind of give you a nice look at a little bit of the build quality side of it. You can see kind of the finishing. This is a fully polished watch, so again, you're not going to necessarily see that, but as far as, you know, getting a clue as to some of the quality and whatnot. But the nice thing is that it does kind of give you an idea for this sunburst dial here, the way that it's going to look in, you know, more common lighting versus just being kind of outside with the light, you know, the sunlight fully on blast, and or being indoors with some really hot studio lights. So just wanted to give you a kind of brief idea there, kind of how everything plays. Okay. All right, guys. So, you know, I guess my closing thoughts, I would say that you know, I'm a really big fan of this piece. It has really nice vintage inspired good looks with a modern build quality, you know, that does still retain the modest sizing. And that's something that you can't say for kind of every watch that's out there like that, or should say like this. Because kind of with the more modern sizes and everything, everything's kind of been plussed up. You know, you'll see watches like this at 41 millimeters, 42, 43, and it's just not the same. You know, it just doesn't kind of carry that same, those proportions. It's really the proportions. I mean, they're great watches, great quality and whatnot. Some of the other options that are out there, you know, some comparable models, you'd be something, you know, where tons of different fashion brands offer something similar to this. And then there's also brands like Orient, you know, with the Bambino that offers something like this, but then it's like 41 millimeters, and then it has an odd lug width, you know, I think at 21 millimeters. So I think the really nice thing about this is really the proportions, and the execution is definitely good. I mean, it's nothing mind-blowing. It definitely still feels like a sub $500 watch. But it's a really nice one, and I gotta say that from a brand that really kind of just specializes in straps, and this is really their first watch model, I'm very impressed with what they're doing, and I'm looking forward to see what they do next. I would definitely love to see a couple of tweaks and changes from their strap side, like I mentioned before, with maybe making those keepers leather, and then of course from the watch side, it'd be really nice to have something that does have a hackable movement, although I'm sure that's gonna definitely add cost. Maybe an automatic option, which would definitely add thickness. So I mean, there's always gonna be trade-offs there, but you know, I think with the level of execution and the great design that you're going to find here, it does make me hopeful for other variations, because I think this is a cool piece. So, you know, definitely let me know what your guys' thoughts are in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please do hit like. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.